Hello, and welcome to Religion and Life. I'm your host, Ozzie. Much has been written about African American spirituality and the Black church tradition in America. My guest today, Jacinta V. White, adds a unique lens for viewing Black church life in the South. In her latest book of poetry, Jacinta offers her voice as a Black woman who was raised as a PK, that's preacher's kid, for those of you not in the know, raised as a PK in the Black church. Welcome, Jacinta. Thank you.
Thank you.
So your latest book of poetry, let's see, Resurrecting the Bones,
Yes.
right? Born from a journey through African American churches and cemeteries in the rural South. You describe this book as a love letter to what you miss about growing up in the Black church, and I love that description. But before we get to that, I wanted to give you a chance to introduce some of your other roles. In addition to being a poet, you are a consultant, I would just say life coach, perhaps, artist, CEO. How do you find time to juggle all of that?
Oh my goodness, that would take, an hour in itself. And I still won't have an answer because I don't know. But as a poet, you also have to pay bills, and so I would love to just be a poet, but in this day and age, I'm not able to just do that. But I am thankful that I do have work that is meaningful to me and that involves the community, whether I'm working with executives like I was earlier today and holding conversations about race and racism. So it's that, to soft skills as a training, to one-on-one coaching, using poetry as a catalyst for our self-discovery and healing through the Word Project. So it's a lot going on, but it's inspiring work. I don't know that I could do a job that didn't allow me to be creative in some kind of way. So I'm thankful for those outlets.
So could you say a little bit about, you said poetry, you understand poetry as a catalyst for growth and embracing wholeness. And I've heard you say that also poetry gives you a kind of compass and grounding. So maybe say a little bit about how you view poetry in these ways and how you incorporate them into your broader work.
Yes. Well, my love for poetry as what I consider a catalyst or a healing modality is firsthand. And I was writing poetry as a way to express myself in my early 20s. And then I experienced the sudden passing of my dad. He had a massive heart attack. I was with him, and I wrote poetry as a way to cope with grief. And it wasn't until years after that, when I was going back through my poetry, that I recognized that it was a lifeline in a sense. It was what, and I also refer to it as an altar. It is what I believe God gave me to be able to deal with that, all those turbulent emotions. So after that deeply personal experience, I began to study what is it about poetry that serves as this outlet or that serves as this compass? What is it about the blank page that I needed so much to allow my tears to fall on? And so through studying poetry therapy and working with others, it was, to be able to use metaphors and similes and short lines and rhythms and, to be able to say what you want to say without saying it explicitly. There's a beauty to that. And I think it's a way to connect to who we are. I like to say that I don't think if we're writing poetry well, that we're able to lie. Poetry brings out the truth. And just saying the truth, I believe, is healing.
To hear you speak of poetry, it sounds as if you view writing poetry as almost a spiritual exercise.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yes.
So can anybody write poetry? I mean, I try. I'm a bad poet. Does that make should I stop, or can I still pursue the writing of poetry as a kind of journey to self-expression?
Totally continue. Totally continue. Yes, it's really not about the outcome of the product. it's the process. It's being able to find your way, and sticking to it is part of that. With anything, with practice, we get better. So definitely stick with it.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate permission to be a bad, so thank you.
And you're probably not as bad as you're saying. I hear that all the time. And group settings, people typically will say, I don't like poetry. I'm not a good poet. And then when it's time to share at the end of the session, after we've been through the writing exercises, they're the first ones to volunteer, and the poetry is really beautiful. So,
wow. Well, you're also a photographer. Some of your photographs are in your new book, and I know when you go out into the field, you take your camera. How do you see your artistic expression through the visual to be related to your word crafting at all? How does that interact?
So I am laughing. I've not been asked that question before, or been considered, honestly, a photographer before. But I'm laughing because I am fortunate to have an uncle in my family, one of my dad's brothers, who won a Pulitzer Prize in photojournalism. So I am far from being the photographer, at least in our family. But yes, I do believe that there are various ways for us to communicate a story. Through the art, and photography is one that is close to me. And I could not visit churches and cemeteries and not take photographs. You know, I would like to think that my poetry brings a visual to it, but I'm not really in my poetry talking about a specific place. So I have to incorporate the photography. But I don't typically use photography and poetry together. It just happened to be the case in this collection.
Okay, so was your photographer uncle, is he the same uncle that accompanied you on the field trips that you took these churches throughout the South?
It was a different brother.
A different brother. Okay.
A huge family, different brother. Yes.
Oh, great. Well, let's turn to your book, Resurrected Bones. It's really a wonderful collection of poetry. Thank you for sharing this with the world. So the book, the collection was born out of this adventure you took with your uncle to visit some of the churches that your father and grandfather had pastored, I guess, before you were born.
Yeah.
There's this connection to your past and your family, but something that you didn't have immediate experience of.
Yes.
So how did that idea get born, and what a wonderful idea it is?
Yes, thank you for asking. I was sitting with my uncle Leroy, and we were having breakfast and talking about what we missed about growing up in the church. He's, some years older than I am, but it was still this common emotion that comes out when we think about growing up in the Black church and the Black church in the South. And he said, let's visit one of the churches, again, that my father or grandfather pastored. And we decided to go on the first Sunday of a month, because typically that's Communion Sunday. The first church that we visited, I had a notebook with me because I had intended to talk to people after service about if they knew my dad and remembered him, and just get that information that I thought I would keep to myself. But I ended up writing a poem in that church right during service. And it's Church Mothers, actually. It's the first poem that I wrote. Not intending to continue to do that, but I had to follow these breadcrumbs or this inkling, this feeling to record my experience. And it came out through photography and poetry. And then after a few, I said, there might be something to this. Yeah.
Well, it strikes me that every time you and your uncle went out, you were kind of embarking on a pilgrimage.
Yes.
A spiritual pilgrimage. And did you, in the metaphorical sense or symbolic sense, did you meet your father and grandfather on these trips?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. And I had the perfect tour guide, because my uncle, the oral history and narrative was so powerful as well.
Yeah. So in the beginning of your book, you quote Isaiah 26:19, which says, in part, the dead shall live, their bodies shall rise. And then, of course, to me, when I read the title of your book, I immediately thought of Ezekiel 37, where God takes Ezekiel to the valley of the dry bones and they're resurrected. So what are you resurrecting your family or the Black church experiences that you missed from your childhood, or what is being resurrected here in these poems?
So, coming into this call, I briefly forgot that this is for a religion class.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, this is a religion program. That's right.
So this is a different type of interview. But I feel that I am attempting to resurrect a number of things. For me personally, and as the book continues, there's a order that I'm trying to have the book to go in that I'm hoping mirrors my progression as a Black woman who grew up Christian, still Christian, but sees things a little differently. So I'm being resurrected through the process. And I'm hopeful that as individuals read this, that their memories and their experiences are being resurrected, whether they're part of the Black church or not. But what is our relationship to religion? What is our relationship to God? And some don't need it to be resurrected because it's already, it's already up there. Yeah. But occasionally it's like a revival, we have to go back and pull up those things that we have buried. Some things may need to stay buried, but I believe that we at least have to revisit those choices.
Well, I'm interested to hear you say that part of what you're resurrecting is yourself. Yeah. Some of your poems in several places speak of rebirth. Is this the rebirth you're talking about here?
Depending on the poem, but
yeah, okay.
But yes, in general, yes. And it's something, honestly, kind of like what I was saying with the poems that I wrote after the passing of my dad. It wasn't really until this collection came together that I was able to see, oh, there's something going on here with me. Because I'm thinking, oh, it's just about the churches and it's about memories and a collection of memories and stories. I'm just the poet, the tunnel, in a sense, that this is coming through. But after I looked at the collection and sat with it some more, I said, I grew through this, and I feel spiritually that there has been a rebirth and a resurrection by going to revisit the past.
Right. Well, I read somewhere that some people can, and perhaps you, considered your father to have a kind of mystic spirituality. Could you describe that? And do you feel like this kind of mystic spirituality runs throughout the book? Because I felt that as I was reading your poems in this book.
Yeah. I have been told, and I had a very close and lovely relationship with my dad, and saw and learned many things by having him in my life for 23 years, and still am astonished by some of the things that he said and shared with me. Others have placed on him the term mystic, and I'm still, I have his writings. So I still take time to go through that and understand that and try and decipher that. I will say, in writing these poems and putting together this collection, that for me, and I've talked with other poets who probably will have a fit if I'm saying this, but for me, it was very spiritual. And there were moments where I felt like I was being used as a vessel. And I don't know that I would say in any way that, it's mystical or that I have that ability, but I do know that I had to surrender to the process and do my best to get out of the way of creating the work and allowing what I believe to be divine to land on the page.
Wow, that's really nice. Yeah. So as I read the poems in this collection, there are biblical quotes and references throughout, and many of them seem to speak to communion, the ritual itself. You chose to go on Communion Sunday. So you talk about the bread has been broken, the body that was broken, you drink the purple wine, and you even have one delightful poem called Communion Wine. Is communion's, tell me how special that is to you or to the Black church tradition. What's going on there with communion?
My goodness. I'm tearing up. Of the rituals in the church, communion for me is the most sacred, just personally. And what I don't have in the poem, because I don't know how to capture it exactly, is the part where the pastor leaves the pulpit and goes to administer communion to someone who's not able to go to the altar. And for me, there is, of course, the biblical, reasons for that we take communion. So remembering Christ, Jesus and his words. But there's also this sense of community that I feel, the sacred community that I feel when communion is happening that I don't feel in any other time. Someone else may say baptism or baptism. But for me, it's communion. And so it does come up a lot in the book. And positively, as well as there's some conflicts with it that I talk about with communion. Right. Poetry is a way of processing. What are you thinking? What are you feeling? What's going on? Let's have an honest dialogue.
Right. I love that poem where you're sitting in the back seat of your father's car. And it's one of those times when he is going out to administer communion to someone who's dying, and you take a sip of the wine, and you want the same thing that he's offering to others. That part of that conflict you're talking about there.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's a beautiful poem.
Thank you.
So another one of your poems in this collection is called "God is Woman."
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I think that, when we think about God and the Christian faith, of course, there's the Trinity. And so Jesus is the one, is the human flesh version of God. And what I began to think about is, what's the feminine face of God? If God doesn't have a gender, if God is spirit, can we look at the feminine face of God? And so my wonderings about that shows up in God as a woman. Because we could talk about God as a man all day. That's what we do.
Right.
He with, capital H. I mean, we talk about God as a man. So I just wanted to recognize for myself that God is everything. And, and then some will, of course, have issues with there being pronouns at all. But, I wanted to refer to God as a woman in that piece. And that also, how do we identify as individuals? How do we identify with God? How are we created in God's image? And so as a woman, sometimes it's helpful for me to think of God as my mother, not just as a father.
Yeah, so I like the way you phrase that. I mean, this is kind of fleshing out the image of God theology. If we take seriously that God's children are created in God's image, then what does that tell a woman who has been taught her whole life that God is male? So I like the way you're playing with the gender there. Is this one of those places where you have, I don't know exactly how you phrased it, but in some ways you said move beyond the church of your upbringing? Because I think sometimes African-American churches in the South tend to be pretty conservative and traditional theology. So it seems like you're departing here a little bit from that.
Yes. Yes, I am departing. It has been, but I needed to do that because to be true as an artist, you have to say what others may not be comfortable with or what may seem to be controversial. And I'm clear. I try to be clear to say, this is my opinion. This is my view. This is my struggle. These are my conflicts. not put that on anyone else to say this is what you need to believe or how you need to think about it. But we are all on a journey, and on a spiritual path, we have to ask these questions. And I don't know that we do enough of that within institutions like the church, because it's seen as blasphemy, or, you know, you're disrespecting who God is. I really think that God can handle our questions. I do. And it's, you know, so let's be in communion in that way, be honest in that way, I think is what we're all needing, and from a soul level.
Yeah. I think your poems need to be read from pulpits in the church. You know, that would be a great way to start these conversations. I want to read just a couple of lines from Lands We Travel, and ask you to comment on it.
Okay.
I hate pulling lines out of a poem without reading the whole thing, but I'm going to do it anyway. So, in that poem, saints have called and I have responded, like old women, hands up, eyes closed, Holy Ghost spilled over in communion wine cups. I drink while body broken like lands open.
Yeah.
Somewhere in heaven, my Father is praying for rain to fall on his seeds. Lord, have mercy. Lord, have mercy. Beautiful lines. And again, you bring up the communion aspect here, but I like the image of the Holy Ghost spilling over out of communion and that's, to me, is a pretty mystical line, just to go back to pull some of those themes together. What inspired you to write that?
You know, I don't know that I can answer that question, to be honest with you. I don't know that I can, you know, this whole process has been one, again, where I move out of the way. So, not to say that I'm not conscious of what I'm writing, but to know, to be able to share verbally the moment when an idea comes and it flows into a line. I don't know that I can explain that. It's that's the spiritual journey part of it, or the spiritual part of it for me. I do know that when I would go visit churches, I would take notes again in my notebook, and certain lines and phrases may come to me then, and it would develop into a poem later. But I can't specifically, you know, I'm what I'm wanting to show in those lines is this connection with communion and the body, which I talk about throughout the series as well, and land, and this brokenness that is there.
Yeah.
With both. Or all three. You know?
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so I asked you before we started if you would read a poem,
Yes.
and I specifically requested that you read a Maritals. I think a couple of things here. You mentioned in the introduction to your book that the role of the African American church in America during the civil rights struggle, in part, inspired this poem, but it also has the rhythm and the sense of the Beatitudes from Matthew's Gospel. So if you wouldn't mind, grace us with a reading here.
Maritals. Blessed are the ones on boats who come across seas and under gates. Blessed are the ones who are told they are ungodly, whose language is stripped from their tongues. Blessed are the warriors in black and brown skin, who boomerang slander and shots of fear. Blessed are the lovers wrapped in rainbows who see no color. Blessed is the past that sweet talks its way under sheets of those who dare not daydream. Blessed are the awakened who stay up sipping tea to see it all. Blessed are the brave who become grave diggers, truth bearers, and poets.
And poets. I love that one. I was hoping you would use that King James blessed in there. You know, it reminds me so much of the Beatitudes. So that was Maritals by Jacinta White. Thank you. So, Jacinta, we're about out of time, and I feel like we've just gotten started. But if, as you say, this book is a love letter to what you miss about the Black church of your childhood, what is it that you miss most that you have perhaps been able to recapture or tried to recapture in this collection?
Oh, that is a great and powerful question. And there are a few things I miss most. One is the sense of extended family. You know, the church mothers, the aunties, the play aunts, the play uncles, the play cousins. I miss that. I miss my family. I miss my dad, of course, but I miss that sense of on Sundays you're going to be with extended family and worship together. I miss, and with that comes support. That comes Black art. And I know that still exists in churches, but I miss the kind of the down home way at the fellowship hall with the dinners and all of that. And just that sense that you get. So some of it is that maybe the Black church hasn't changed that much. And maybe it's that because I've grown up. Because someone would say, we still have bake sales. You come to our bake sale and our fellowship hall and fish fry, what have you. But I just miss the sense of pride and a family that came with growing up in the Black church.
Yeah, that's a beautiful sentiment. And of course, I guess we're all missing that fellowship now during the times of COVID when we can't gather together like we're used to and can't embrace like we're used to. So now more than ever, I think a book like Resurrecting the Bones can resonate with us. And because I felt a lot of nostalgia in this and just brought back good feelings and good memories. So again, I thank you for this wonderful contribution to American literature, North Carolina literature. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
It's been a lovely interview. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that's it for Religion and Life for this week. I hope you'll join us next week on App TV when we continue to explore the relationship between religion, culture, and society. Until then, this is Ozzie Ostwald.